already on the line, and thank you all for taking some time out of your day to join us for this webinar, Ed-Fi on Google Cloud Platform. We're excited to bring you this webinar. So a couple just housekeeping notes. I'm Caroline Kazmersky, Ed-Fi's Director of Communications, and we're joined by Marcos Alcazar and Sean Casey, who will do the bulk of the webinar. But just to give you a couple little housekeeping notes, everyone that is joining us today, you are muted and we cannot see your screen or see your video. So just know that you're on mute, and I'm confirming that for you. So just in case you wanted to know, we are recording this session. We will email you the recording after we wrap today, and it will also be available on our website under the events tab. So if there's any colleagues that wanted to hear this webinar, you can always shoot them the link after we wrap up the webinar today. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop those into the Q&A bar or into the chat, whichever you find easiest, and we will do our best to answer those. Either Sean will be standing by to answer those in written format, and we can also just pause the presentation and ask those verbally as well, just to have that interactive conversation. So feel free to ask questions. That's totally what we're here for, and we encourage you to do so. So without further ado, I will let Marcos and Sean take it over. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Caroline. Hi there, this is Sean Casey from the Ed-Fi team. I am the sous chef for this presentation. I am just helping. Marcos is the expert, and he's going to actually walk you through this. But my role is to help LEAs and collaboratives, groups of LEAs, learn about interoperability and just get connected into our community and make use of the resources, the tools, and other things that they can use to leverage and to make their journey of utilizing interoperable data easier or more streamlined. So any questions that you've got, like Caroline said, pop them into the chat or the Q&A. I'll either field them as we go, or I'll interject when there's a good moment with Marcos, and we'll talk about them as a group. But let me hand it over to Marcos, who's basically your solution architect for LEAs and collaboratives, helping you with technical planning and considerations and support for standing up these kinds of solutions in your environment. Marcos, you want to take it away?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sean. And before I dive into the webinar content, can you give a few sentences on the Exchange Live event that we've got coming up in just a few months?
Yeah, you bet. The event that Marcos is teeing up there is a really neat one. We've done our first virtual event this past year in the pandemic, and we called it Exchange Live. And it was interesting because it really broadened the audience. It allowed a lot more people to come because it was virtual and remote, a different kind of event for us, but it really opened the door for participation for a lot of folks. We had instructional leaders as well as technical leaders attend this, a lot of teams, and because it's remote and virtual, the cost to attend is very low. And so the registration for that is open now, and there's even an early bird rate that if you sign up before the end of next week, before the 30th of April, it drops down and discounts that registration fee, I think, to $25 per person. And so it's a really good opportunity to bring a good sized team. And like I said, there will be topics that speak to your program leadership and your instructional leadership, as well as to technical folks. And it's a really good time an opportunity to kind of bridge those folks together into a team to get the most out of this, and then bring back what's useful to your organization. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome. So yes, if you enjoy hanging out with Sean and I today, then tell your friends, and we'll see all of you at Exchange Live in June. So this is what we're going to be doing today. Today is a live tech demo of deploying Ed-Fi on Google Cloud. And when I say Ed-Fi, what I'm talking about here is deploying the ODS, which in this case is a Postgres database, the Ed-Fi API that one interfaces with in order to put data into the ODS and to read data from the ODS, and an application that we have called the admin app. The admin app is the administrative panel to actually make some configuration changes to your Ed-Fi ODS. And we'll be using a few products under Google Cloud in order to deploy this solution. And so let me walk you through what those products are at a high level, and then we're gonna get hands-on and go live demo and actually get this thing going. So the operational data store, or the ODS, is going to be in a managed Postgres 11 instance. So what managed means in this case is that Google is going to take care of a lot of things for you with your database instance. There are things that if you have an on-prem database or you're deploying a database instance in the cloud but in a non-managed environment, there are things that Google has taken off of your plate. One of those things are things like automatic storage increases, things where you can start off an ODS with 10 gigabytes of space, which is what we're going to do today. And then Google will just monitor it and it will just add more space as you need it. And you'll pay for the space you use, but you'll start low and only grow if it's necessary. And the same thing goes with compute. You have control, and I'll show you how in Google Cloud to define the amount of virtual CPUs and memory that is allocated for your database instance. You don't have to worry about backups with Google Cloud SQL. Google will create backups for you nightly that you'll be able to use go back to if you need to. So maybe your ODS is running well and there's a change in the configuration and you notice the next day something got messed up and you just want to go back to how it was yesterday and then put your configuration back. You can do that with just a few clicks in Google Cloud. The pricing, it will be variable and it will be different depending on the person who's implementing this, but your base kind of shared instance version of the API, if you're familiar with that configuration for Ed-Fi, I'll talk about it a bit more later, but your single education organization that is putting one student information systems data into the ODS is going to run around $30 a month for the Google Cloud SQL instance. And your mileage may vary. You may have a very large district, and so you're going to use up a little bit more space, need additional compute. And Google has a Google Cloud pricing calculator, if you search online for it, where you can try out a few different situations. You can say, well, what if I used 50 gigs of space? And what if I needed extra RAM? What would that run me? The other service we're going to use is Google Cloud Run. And we're going to use this for the Ed-Fi API and the Ed-Fi admin app. And so this is also a managed service, but it's also serverless. And what this means is that we are going to provide Google with some code and with a Docker file, and then Google's going to deploy that for us in their Google Cloud Run service. We're not going to have to worry about anything with the servers. It's using Kubernetes on the back end. We won't be exposed to that. We won't need to touch that. Google will take care of that for us. When we're not using the application, so think about something like the Ed-Fi admin app. You use the Ed-Fi admin app to configure a few things with your ODS, and then you may not use it for weeks because you may not need to make a change. During that time, Google will spin that down to 0, and they will not charge you for that app being in your project. Start to use it again, it will spin up, and you'll incur some cost. And that goes with the API as well. If it's being used, it's on. If it's not, they'll scale it down to 0. We can use any language. So here we're on .NET. Ed-Fi has moved to .NET Core, which means we can run the API and admin app under Linux. And so it's going to work on Google Cloud Run. what I mean by redundancy built in is that as the API scales, in the back end, Google is not only deploying one server to run the API, but it's actually deploying many. You can think of them as virtual servers to run your application without getting too technical on what goes on behind the scenes here. And if one goes down, well, there are others there, and Google will spin up more as needed. So they really kind of put that all in this managed serverless product, so you don't have to worry about it. Logging is here. I'll show you that. And I'll just say that kind of in my experience, and again, your mileage may vary, in my experience, I have stayed within the free tier on Google Cloud Run. So in my experience with one sys into the ODS in shared instance mode, I'd say you're looking at $30 to $50 to be safe per month for the solution, but typically around 30. Okay, we are going to get into demo mode. So let me go ahead and switch over. We're going to switch over and look at our Google Cloud project. So there are a few things you need in order to go through this later on your own. You need to actually configure a billing account for Google Cloud. If you are new to Google Cloud, you go to cloud.google.com, you create an account. Google will give you $300 of credit for your first year. And so you're set up right there for a good portion of the year. But you'll link it to a credit card and be alerted at the end of the $300 and have the option to either spin down resources or to start to incur costs. But what we're looking at here is a Google Cloud Platform project that we're going to be working within to deploy everything. I'm actually not going to run anything in my local environment. I'm going to do it all from the browser so that you don't have to worry about dependencies and all of those things. We are working to move the scripts that I'm using for this webinar into the Ed-Fi repository, but for now we're in a public repo that I have here that I'll be using, and then we'll be sharing our webinar artifacts later, and these scripts will move into the Ed-Fi repo. But the first thing that I want to do here is I want to go into this GitHub repo and I want to copy the URL because I'm going to clone it into my environment here. Now, Google Cloud has a virtual machine that's allocated for each person who uses Google Cloud to help them with tasks in their project. And so up in the top right, I can activate that virtual machine. It's called Cloud Shell. And a little terminal is going to pop up here. And this is a Linux environment, a little virtual machine where I can put code in here, I can run commands, and it gets pretty powerful pretty fast. So if I hit this button here to open a new window, it's going to open a new window. I'm going to come back and close this here. So I have my Cloud Shell. If I hit this editor button, if you're familiar with the editor Visual Studio Code by Microsoft, well, that runs off of an open source IDE that is also baked into Google Cloud right here. And so I have an online IDE that is free to use, and I have a terminal at the bottom that is also free to use. And there is a bunch of just things ready to go for me. So if I'm at the bottom at this terminal, I have things like .NET already on here. I have things like Python already on here. I have the Postgres CLI already on here. I have Docker already on here. And so this is all just already set up for me. And so I don't have any files in here right now, but I'm going to bring in this code repo. So I'm going to go ahead and clone in that repo. I've got it. I can change into the directory. And up here, so we're not just looking at a terminal the whole time. I'm going to open up that folder. So I cloned in the code with git clone in the URL. And now the files that we were looking at in GitHub are here in my Cloud IDE. And I built out the README to just walk us through the various steps for getting this up and running in your Google Cloud project. And so I'm just going to kind of read through them as if they're my notes and walk through it right now with all of you. And then they'll be here later for you to do the exact same thing to deploy your solution. So we're going to start with the ODS. We're going to start with the database. The first thing we want to do is we want to run this command here, bash, and then it goes into a folder called Ed-Fi ODS, and it runs a file called 001 init. So we're going to start with this, and this is going to do a few things. This is going to enable some services. What these commands do is it lets me actually create resources in my project from the command line without having to click in all the different spots in the UI. And then I'm going to download the artifacts that we need. These are database backups. So these are backups of the admin database, the security database, things that Ed-Fi hosts on Azure, and we can pull in here. And then I unzip them, and then I create what's called a service account, which we're going to come back to. So all I'm going to do is copy this first one here. I'm going to paste it at the bottom, and I'm going to run that. So Google wants to know, do I authorize these calls? I do. And so it's going to go through, and it's going to download those artifacts. You know, I don't want to keep artifacts like that in my Git repo. I'm going to keep them in their natural place, Ed-Fi's Azure storage, and I just want to pull them in when I need. So now if we look in my files up here, I have folders of those backups. So I go under like Ed-Fi ODS admin, and I have those artifacts that I downloaded. So we're going to leave that there. There's one step that I ran before the webinar just to make sure that we weren't all staring at a progress bar go by for 5 minutes, which is this second one. So I'm going to skip this, but I'm going to show you what it does. When you run the second command, it actually creates the Cloud SQL instance. So gcloud SQL create, put it in the zone, central time zone, but you can switch it if you're on one of the coasts. Do version 11 of Postgres. I've got my memory, CPU, the auto increase of storage, and then I enable backups. And then I create some databases. When you run this, what will happen is back here in your project, you'll have a new little resource. So I've got a resource here. It's my SQL instance. I click on it. I have just one SQL instance. It's my Ed-Fi ODS. This is my managed solution. If I go under databases, got my 3 databases. Now these are empty. There's nothing in them. We're going to together seed it with data. So I click on overview. This is where I was talking about how you can really control the resources that are in use in terms of compute with your SQL instance. I have 1 virtual CPU and I have 4 gigs of memory, but I can hit edit. I'll enable this so that I can see the settings. And what I'll be able to do is I'll actually be able to add additional virtual CPUs, additional memory, without having to create a whole new instance. And so if your needs change over time, you can tweak the compute behind your SQL instance to adjust for that. So we're going to let this continue to enable while we look at the next step together. So I'll just go back to my README file. We want to navigate to the SQL instance to set the password for the Postgres user. So there's just one user in here by default. It's our Postgres user. I click change password. So I did this part manually. I didn't want us entering any passwords on the command line, and then they get stuck in our bash history and things like that. So there'll be a few parts where I click, and I'll explain why. And then this is where you put in your password. So we've got a password that we'll just use for today, Mariana5, and the @. This will be our password for our Postgres user for our database. Go ahead and set that. It says user updated. We're going to jump back here and see if this finished its thing. It did. So this is what I was enabling, and I wanted to show you just exactly where you'd go to say, you know what, give me 4 virtual CPUs, give me 15 gigs of RAM, or tweak it however you want. So this is where you can customize your instance, but we're going to leave it. Okay, we've got our SQL instance. We are ready to import our data. Before we actually start the import, we need to create a tunnel between our Linux VM here and the Google Cloud SQL instance. And so Google provides us with a tool called Cloud SQL Proxy to be able to do that. So I'm going to take this command here and I'm going to paste it. And before I hit enter, we want to replace this instance connection name with the instance name of our instance. Every instance has their own name. Google gives it to you right here. So I go ahead and copy that. Go ahead and paste this in. So I'm creating that secure tunnel to be able to connect to the ODS. I'm going to leave this open, and I'm just going to open up a new little terminal for me. Okay, we are ready to run the next command to import the data. So let's look at the file. This is a pretty straightforward file. We're just running the psql command to be able to import those backups that we downloaded from Azure into the databases. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's going to ask you for the password a few times. So just get really good at hitting Control-V and doing that. If you see a bunch of text fly by, that's a great sign. That means your data, the backups are being imported into the database. This long one is the ODS, which definitely, I think we're up to just over 500 tables there. And then we'll enter it a few more times for the admin app. Let's let this run. All right. All right, and I'll just clear this. Now this is pretty cool. We can actually see that it worked, because if we go back to our project and we switch to our storage usage here, and let me see if the chart is going to catch up to everything that we just did. Let's see. Oh, it just already jumped. We're at 107 megs there. There it is. We're down here, and then boom, we ran that import. Our databases have been seeded. So we're done with the ODS. The ODS is ready to go. We are now moving on to the API. So we need to deploy an API that can connect to the database. In order to connect to the database, we need to give the password for the ODS to the API for it to use, so it can actually make that connection. We don't want to store that in plain text in the code. We also don't want to store that as something like an environment variable. And so what we want to do is we want to go into a tool that Google has here called Secret Manager. It's a pretty great name for it. And we want to create a secret. And this is a great place. If we just go back. Secret Manager lets you store, manage, and secure access to your application secrets. And so this is a nice encrypted place where we can come in and we can create a secret called ODS password. And I can put in my super secret value, my Postgres username, and I can create that secret. And then when the API needs to connect to the database, it's going to access the secret here, and it's going to use that. Okay. When I ran the first step, I created myself a nice service account. So service accounts are something that are there on all cloud providers. They all have service accounts. It's basically, you know, I'm an owner of this project. I have full permissions in this project. I don't want to run these resources under my user. I want to create a service account that only has access to do a certain set of things. So to run the API, access the secret, and that's it. Because there's all these other things in the cloud project, and I want to make sure that I scope the security as much as possible down for this service account. So the first script created a service account. It's called Ed-Fi Cloud Run. I'm going to copy the email, and I'm going to go into the secret manager, and I'm going to give the service account access to this secret. Okay, and those permissions that I just shared, they're here in the README. So you'll have them on the video, but then they're also written down here. Okay, we are ready to deploy our API. There's a folder called Ed-Fi API, and there's one script in it called Deploy API. And these are the commands. Let me walk through it. Well, let me start the command and then I'll walk through it. Okay, here we go. All right, we're gonna let that run. Let's look at what the script is doing. The script is first building an image, building a Docker image, and it's using a Docker file. Now, big shout out here to the Ed-Fi tech team. The code you're looking at here in the Docker file is from the Ed-Fi GitHub repo for Docker, and it's the file that they use to build the official Ed-Fi Docker images that are on Docker Hub. So know that the API is on Docker Hub. We are not using those images in this example because we needed to tweak the Docker file to work on Google Cloud and to work with the secret. But what the Docker file has in it is it's saying to use a .NET 3.1 Linux container, Alpine, so a very slim one, to use the Ed-Fi version 5.1, to copy over some files that we have here. If you've used Ed-Fi before, you'll be familiar with things like API, mode, shared instance. This is a line that I added. I'll butcher this because I don't know how to pronounce it. Burglus. The good news is I don't think any of us know. So we all think it's Burglus now. So Burglus is a tool that Google created that we can use here. And what it does is at the bottom in our entry point for our Docker, before we actually run Ed-Fi, and that's what this is here, before we actually kick off the API, we run Burglus. And what Burglus does is it actually goes and it reads the value of our secret. And then it sets it as an environment variable for the API. So we won't get into the details here, but that is how we are keeping our Postgres password encrypted, and we're not putting it as an environment variable to be passed in and synced. So we are building the image. We are giving that service account that I talked about, that Ed-Fi Cloud Run. We're giving it permission to connect as a client to Google Cloud SQL. So we're saying, okay, you can access the secret. We're saying, okay, you can access the SQL instance. So we have to be very specific about what it can do, because by default it could do nothing. And so we have to make sure we give permission. We give them access to the secret here, and then we actually deploy. And what we are saying is, up here we built the image, and now we are deploying the image. We'll get into the next, some of this in the UI. It'll be easy to read. What we're saying, we've started out with a gig of memory and a couple virtual CPUs. And it's finished. So let's go look at our application. Ed-Fi API. Let me go back and show you what I did. So I'm back on the main screen. In the search bar, I type in run. That's how I get to the product cloud run. Here's our application, the Ed-Fi API. Here's our URL, HTTPS by default. We'll let this load, and we should see a bunch of version numbers, which means that the API is successfully running and it's successfully connected to the ODS. And if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. But so far, we've got a working ODS, we've got a working API. We see we're on v5.1. We see, I told you I'd show you a few things in the UI. We've got our logs. So if there are any logs, maybe a piece of data didn't make it through, you sent a student school association, but the student doesn't exist, you'll see all of that here. Got our URL, and we've got, here's our environment variables. So dbpass, this is where we get into that burglars command. I set an environment variable called dbpass, but instead of putting in the password, I put in a reference. This is my cloud project ID. This is my secret. So I didn't put in the password, but I told it where the password is. And then burglars went and got it and set it in the environment variable, but it never comes through in the UI. So it keeps it nice and protected. Okay, we are ready to deploy the admin app. So this one is going to be a little bit different. We are running the command Ed-Fi admin app, the deploy command. This is an environment variable. Google will just replace this in the Cloud Shell with their project ID, save us some time. And then I'm putting in that new API URL. So we have this Ed-Fi API service, we have a URL. I'm just taking that and I'm adding it. So now if we look in the admin app folder, we have a different Docker file here. This is for the admin app version 2.1.1. Also the .NET 3.1 Alpine. And this is a little bit simpler of a script here, but just 2 steps: building the image, uploading the image. And so, or building the image, uploading it, and then deploying the app from the image. Your Docker images, because we're waiting for it to deploy, actually live in your cloud project. So if I type in container, I get my container registry, and then this is where I'm storing my Docker images. So, all right, so let's see how it's doing. It finished already, so that's great. Let's type in run, go back to our cloud run. Now we have another service here. We have our admin app. So if I click in, we have a URL. It's different. This is the one for the admin app. Let that load for the first time. All right, so we have our admin app. Just show you how to get in. We've got to register for a new account, set a password, set super secure secret. No one will guess it. Go ahead and register my user. Okay, good. I've got to make it a bit more secure. Super secure secret 4.
That wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, was it?
That, that one, that would have been even more secure. Let me accept this. Now, the reason why I wanted to actually register the user is because I wanted to show you a known bug that we know is in here, and we are working on fixing it, but I don't want you to get scared when you see it, which is you register your user, you get in here, go to settings, it warms up your API URL, and it gives you this error. And it actually just tells you right here what you should do. Please try restarting the ODS API now and reload to see if the same error occurs. Now, if you walk away and go get a cup of coffee, eat lunch, and come back, you'll be fine. But if you wanted to kind of get around this right away, you can go into your Google Cloud SQL instance, and you can manually restart it. So during this install process, we created some additional tables in your ODS, and we need you to restart the ODS in order for everything to sync back up and for us to be off to the races. Again, this will just fix itself, but you can come in and click restart. I'm going to not click restart right now because it takes sometimes a good 5 minutes for it to restart. But now we're in the admin app, and then this is where you can create your vendors, your application key and secrets, your ed.orgs, things of that nature. But that is it on the demo. I want to share just a few things with the time that we have. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. But it's kind of like the what next. So you get to the point where you have this. In under 45 minutes, we have a production Ed-Fi tech stack deployed. We recommend, Sean and I, that you really work on defining your use case next, and you drive after that. And we have a good place for you to start if you need some inspiration, and they're called our starter kits. So these are use case driven. We have 2 right now that are published, and we have a new one coming very soon. The 2 are on chronic absenteeism and family engagement. And these manifest themselves in the first one in a Tableau or Power BI dashboard, and then a custom web portal that parents can log into to see information about their student. And so this is a great place to actually log into a hosted environment of fake student data to see data products you could build from the Ed-Fi ODS, and then to deploy it in a short period of time with sample data to start to get hands-on, and then to go on a journey to deploy it with your assist data. That's the first place you might want to start. The second one is we invite you to join us in our weekly In the Weeds meetup. So this is a meeting that happens every Friday afternoon. You can find a great blog post on it on our blog, edfi.org/blog. A bunch of us get on WebEx, and we do some deep dives into various topics. Sometimes you can be the kind of lone data person at your district or ed.org, and this is a great community to get hooked into, to be able to have a lot of deeper conversations about data and data infrastructure. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is just if you need a thought partner to help you kick off your work, I'm always here. You can always reach out to me. We can always communicate over email, schedule a call, really whatever you need. I'm ready to help, and so is Sean. That's it on my end. Sean, how are we doing on the chat and QA? Anything you'd want to add?
We're good. I was just finding a link for a question that we got from Gus. Gus, thanks for popping that in. He was interested in what support there is for deploying in other public clouds, especially AWS. And Gus, I'm just putting into the Q&A section the link to the cloud deployment guide, which is in a tool that we call the Ed-Fi Exchange. If you if you go there and it prompts you for a community login, there's just a real short online form to create yourself an account that'll then provision you into access to a whole bunch of resources that the Ed-Fi Alliance provides to community members. If you already have your community account, you can just get in there and start downloading the information from that deployment guide and the other things that are of interest in the exchange.
Great. Yeah. And if you found this format helpful, this is the true hands-on technical demo that you could follow later and deploy the same solution. If you found it helpful, let us know. I'd be interested in doing an Azure one and doing an AWS one and having those as resources too, so that people can choose their preferred kind of cloud platform and go from zero to production within the span of just one webinar.
Marcos, there's another question. Are the applications using, in this demo, are the applications using the same Postgres super user that was used to create and populate the databases?
Yes, they are. By default, they are. They're using the same Postgres user, and you can definitely adjust that if you'd like to, but they are using the same user. And Google, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Google Cloud SQL actually in the UI just lets you go ahead and create additional users. They make it very easy to do that.
Marcos, I was going to ask you just a very basic question, which is, so you stepped through a bunch of deployments and we ended up with the admin app deployment. And I'm not sure, just some of the folks on our attendee list I recognize and some I don't. I wonder if it might be worth a voiceover for what's the admin app? Why would you use that? Why does it matter? How is it useful in an Ed-Fi deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the admin app is instrumental when you need to start to send your SIS data to your ODS. It's instrumental in helping you work through that process. It's the place where let's say you have Infinite Campus as your student information system. Well, when you go into your SIS and you say, well, connect to this Ed-Fi API, this is my URL, you need to give a API key and secret. And so you create that in the admin app. So in the admin app, you create a vendor called Infinite Campus, you create an application, and then that's where you start to generate those. That's where you generate the keys and secrets that you hand off to your SIS. It also does a few other things. It's by default, there are no learning standards in your ODS, but there are certainly, it's built out to hold learning standards. There's a form you can fill out that's linked through our tech docs to get to academic benchmarks, where they will give you a free API key and secret that you just plug into your admin app and you click a sync button and they go and they just seed your ODS with all the major learning standards. And so those are two of the main things you can do in the admin app.
Terrific, thank you. We've got a few other actually good questions that are trickling in too. The first one is, for folks that are familiar with Google App Engine, but Google Run may be new to them or just not something that they use commonly, what's the rationale, maybe the compare contrast with using Google Run in this instance versus Google App Engine?
Yeah, that is a great question that is difficult to have a great answer for, because the Google Cloud community is in a space right now where there is that overlap. And so there are products like App Engine and Cloud Run where they do very similar things. What I'll say is Cloud Run is the newer product, and from my point of view, as someone who's not, I'm not at Google, it's where I see Google pointing a lot of people to, and a lot of their documentation they'll have documentation for App Engine or Google Kubernetes Engine, where Google talks about using those products, but they say, well, really, if you just have this application, like in this use case, that could work well in Cloud Run, well, we recommend you use that. So I don't have a great answer, just that Cloud Run is the newer product. It's where they seem to be putting a lot of their investment. And App Engine is something that's heavily utilized by people, but I think it's unclear where it's going in the future.
Got it. Thanks. Another question, this came from Charlie, was, does GCP provide any perks as far as accessing the data once it's in the ODS? Like, for instance, could you access it via BigQuery?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So Google BigQuery allows what's called federated queries onto a few other data sources. One of those is Google Cloud SQL. From within Google BigQuery, you can query, which is Google's cloud data warehouse. You can query the native tables in BigQuery. You can also query your Postgres ODS from within BigQuery. So you can write a SQL query that denormalizes your ODS data. And you can run that in BigQuery, and BigQuery will run that in Postgres and put the results into BigQuery as either just in the result table or in a native table itself. It's pretty slick what you can do between the two.
I wonder if that might be a good follow-up topic for a future webinar.
Yeah, if people want that, please let us know. We can show you how to bring your ODS data into something like BigQuery to build data products in Google Data Studio, which is a free product. And you can get to the point where you are building data products for dashboards for your teachers and your students that filter by who's looking at it. And again, Data Studio is a free product.
Mm-hmm. We have a question also from Stacy Ann, which is, will we be able to deploy to SQL Server databases on Google Cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in progress. It's not released yet, but we're absolutely working on it. Google Cloud SQL does support Microsoft SQL Server. The Ed-Fi tech team is working on supporting SQL Server under this Linux environment for the API. Yes, later this year, you will absolutely be able to do what I did today, but with a Microsoft SQL Server database.
And that does it, it looks like, for our questions. I'm going to plug a few things quickly in case anybody else has any lingering questions. Just pop them into the chat and we'll get to those too. But for everybody who attended today, first of all, totally appreciate your time. I know you have a lot on your plates, and so thanks for carving out time to join us. Earlier in the chat thread, there were a couple of links posted that I want to just remind you of, or if you came in a little bit late, let you know about. One is called the In the Weeds with the Ed-Fi tech team, which is an informal meetup on Friday afternoons where you can dive deep into technical topics with the members of the tech team, and even they break into subgroups on topics that are really of interest, so that you're getting to spend time digging into the things that are really what you're trying to tackle or what you're interested in tackling most with the people that are experienced and knowledgeable about it. And by the same token, they want to hear from you in terms of what you're seeing running up against those things on the front lines in your school system. So it's really valuable both ways. So we'd encourage you to join those. Those are Friday afternoons at 2 p.m. Central. And then we splashed up an event that's coming up called Exchange Live, which is in June. Registrations are open. There's a registration link in the chat there. Thanks, Marcos. Where there's a discounted rate to register right now, and it's only $25 a person if you do it by next Friday, the 30th. Really good event, really high quality content. A lot of it is presented by folks in the field, so not just Ed-Fi staff members, but like the people who are leaders, peer leaders out in the field on some of these topics and work. Great chance to bring a good sized team and to bring your instructional and your technology leadership together, which is really the secret sauce for successful implementations in our experience. So I wanted to plug those couple of things. I do think we got one more question while I was chatting about that, and that was from Dan, which is, what's the advantage of using managed Postgres or Microsoft SQL for this rather than loading directly to BigQuery?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when it comes to having your database in Cloud SQL and something like Postgres or SQL Server versus BigQuery, what I'd say is you have to think about two things. One is Ed-Fi supports Postgres and Microsoft SQL Server. It does not support BigQuery, and the reason why is because Postgres and SQL Server are meant to be your transactional type of databases. It's where you're updating records, you're inserting, deleting records. While you can do some of those things in Google BigQuery, you're not really meant to do that in any large numbers. Your BigQuery is what's called an OLAP environment, where it's for analytics processing. So you're meant to dump massive amounts of data into BigQuery, not update individual rows and run those CRUD operations, but to load in massive amounts of data and then run your analytics from there. And so from Ed-Fi's perspective, from Google's documentation perspective, it's ideal that you're keeping your ODS in Postgres or Microsoft SQL Server. That is your ODS, that is where your transactions happen. And then you are moving the data, typically in a denormalized format, into something like the Google BigQuery for your downstream analytic needs.
Very good. Well, Marcos, anything else for the good of the order? This was a great run through, very clear. I do wonder if it might be good just to say in a recap what it is that you did, kind of the major steps of what you deployed today, because the amount of time that it took is pretty amazing. You know what I mean? Just having been around this work for a few years now, it's amazing to me how streamlined this has become, and your walkthrough was a great example of it.
Yeah, and I'll say a couple of years ago at an Ed-Fi Technical Congress, so we run two events. We run the Technical Congress where the community truly gets a say in the future of Ed-Fi, and we run the Summit, which is where we celebrate things that people do in the field. The Technical Congress a couple of years ago in Florida, attendees voted for Ed-Fi to adopt an open source database and to support things like containers. And so we are in a different world in Ed-Fi than we were several years ago because of the community's vote. And so what I did today, what I demoed today, would not be possible without that specific event and those specific votes. And so what we did today was we deployed the API on a Linux container in an environment where Google manages scaling it appropriately. So we just kind of tell it in code what we want to run, and Google figures out how to run it. We did that, and then we created a SQL instance in a managed environment where Google does a bunch of things for us, like increases storage and lets us tweak compute, but does daily backups. And then we did the admin app in Google Cloud Run. So we use these products to deploy these parts, but we leveraged managed and serverless options where possible to be able to deploy this in a small amount of time. Again, small amount of money, in my opinion, around $30 a month. And then it lets us get to where we want to go, which is load this thing up with data and start creating data products for our users. So great, that is it for me on my end for today.
Let's call it a wrap then, and we will we'll post the recording. That'll be up on the Ed-Fi site under the events menu. Marcos, totally appreciate the expertise in distilling that and showing it, letting people kind of kick the tires with you virtually. Really appreciate that. And very much appreciate everybody carving time out of a busy day to join us for it.
Thank you, everybody. Hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you.